Hello, I'm Lizzie Harper from lizzieharper.co.uk, and today I'm going to be doing another step-by-step botanical illustration film. The plant I've chosen today is the viola, which is, you can only see the plastic thing here, but you can, here they are, they're small versions of the garden pansy, and I got them from the local garden centre. I think they're readily available. The equipment I'm going to be using is, I've got a pencil, which is my Pentel P205 HB lead, 0.5mm, which I swear by. In terms of erasers, I've got this very good soft Factis triangular number, incredibly cheap, does the job. Paper, I'm going to be working on my, sorry, I know the text is reversed out. It's a botanical ultra smooth paper, and it's produced by RKB Fat Pads. And I love these pads because they're spiral bound and you can open them out like that. And the paper is thick enough to work on both sides. It's not my ideal paper, but it's good enough for a sketchbook study. So that's all right. Brush wise, I'll be using just an old scrappy brush for mixing my colours. And for actually painting with, I'm still favouring this, which is the Princeton Velvettouch, and it's a number 2. It's a synthetic brush, and still, even after about a month of use, it hasn't lost its tip, which is brilliant. I'll be using my paint box, and that's a guide to all the colours. I'm not going to be using all of those, and there they are inside. So you can see there's plenty of half pans, plenty of pans, mostly Winsor Newton colours in there, although I'm not that specific. Sometimes I use Dale Rowney, sometimes I use Daniel Smith, but I top them up from the tube, which supposedly you're not meant to do, but I've done it for years. Doesn't seem to be a problem. Cup of tea you always need, and these days I always need glasses as well. Yeah, so there we go. May as well get started. So I've isolated the flower that we're going to draw, which is this little viola. Latin name, if you need it, is for pansies and for viola, is Viola wittrockiana, after the Swedish botanist Weitbrecher Wittrock, who studied the violet family, and these are part of the violet family. How you can tell a pansy apart from a viola, it's a bit, you know, really. But if you want to know, supposedly a viola has 2 petals pointing upwards and 3 pointing downwards, although the label on this says that this is a viola. A pansy, meanwhile, has 4 petals pointing upwards, like this, and 1 pointing downwards. Generally, violas are smaller and they're more compact, and their blooms are smaller, and pansies can be larger, but other than that, there's not a great deal in it. So I'm going to put this here and I'm going to draw it. So they've got 5 petals, these flowers. I'm only going to be doing the flower. If you want to look at the leaves, do bear in mind there are 2 different sorts. So they're basically heart-shaped, more or less, lobed with these edges, heart-shaped and quite sort of, yeah, rounded. Upper ones, which come off the stem of the flower, the flower is borne on a long stem, a long peduncle. They are much longer. I haven't got any in amongst the set of pansies that I've got, unfortunately. But the flower itself has 5 petals, so I'm just going to start in the middle, and I'm just going to draw my way around the outside shape of this petal. Oopsie. And then back to the middle. Oh, that's not right. I'm not drawing very well today, actually. It's probably not the best of days to be doing a video. Okay. And this bottom one, some people call it the posterior, but I think we can just call it the one big bottom petal. So that one comes around like that. And then there's a kind of slight raise where you're halfway around. And then the other side comes around as well. Oh, that's not good. That was much too blunt. Did you see there was a lack of there was a lack of fluidity to that, so we're going to redraw that. There's a slight wobble there, which is fine. We'll put that in as well. I've slightly exaggerated that, but it doesn't really matter. And then these two petals on either side, and folding in behind the main base petal. And then we've got this petal here, one of the two at the back. And then there is also another one. Oop, it's folded back on itself. So I'm now going to tilt my specimen forward slightly to see where it finishes. So it finishes there and it comes out of there. So I'll just plot that in as well. So there we go. So that's the basic shape. It looks a bit weird to me. I'm going to extend this. I think this is slightly larger on both sides. I don't normally do this. Normally I just draw and trust my eye, but I think that it just looks a little weird to me. So I'm going to make that slightly rounder and longer. Always keep looking, you know, and keep drawing. It doesn't matter. I mean, just keep drawing till you get the thing looking right. And don't be all hung up about whether it looks good or not. Just try and be as botanically accurate as you can. Okay, so and that absolutely is quite central, the stem, but I'm going to put a slight curve in it, only a very slight one, because it's a kind thing to do to the eye. Compositionally, it's quite a nice thing to do. Okay, so I've got the centre here. Shall I zoom in? Maybe I'll zoom in. Got the centre here, like that. And then I'm looking at the markings now. So there's one set of yellow markings that do that. One set of lovely dark purple markings, which come out. I've done the yellow far too big there. Hang on. The yellow is more like that, isn't it? Keep looking, keep changing. There's the darker ring, which kind of flattens itself off there. And then there's this, which is much more heart-shaped, this pale thing. So I'm only plotting the pale thing in very, very lightly. Whoop. Because I don't want to leave pencil marks all over the illustration, which might be hard on the paler areas to erase later. Okay. Right, now I've got those, I'm going to actually put the detail in. So the yellow comes out like this. I know this is quite hard to see because it's pencil, and pencil is difficult to film. And I apologise for that. It will. It's going to get easier. Okay. I'm actually going to not put those. I'm just going to put the shape in to start with. Now I'm going to put these striations in. Across the pale. They almost touch. They do. They go, look, they go into the yellow. They go into the spaces between the yellow. Like that. There we are. And of course, when we come to actually draw this, to add colour, we'll be redrawing all of this. I mean, that's what we do. Draw with pencil and then redraw everything with paint. That bit of a curve on it. And this one doesn't curve. I would have thought it would have done, but it doesn't. So you've got to be true to your specimen. And that goes like that. Which is folding over this. So that one's in front of this. So that doesn't look right. So let's make certain that that one shows that it's in front of those petals which are behind it. Okay, there we go. Lovely. Now we're going to put, I can see these here, small structures. And here this, as I say, I'm just being very, very light with this. Barely visible, I should think. Yeah, you can just about see it. Just to see what's going on. Okay, that's all good. So now these two side petals. What's going on here? So we've got some fluffy bits here, which are part of the flowering structure. There we are. Now, the flowering structure of the pansy is a marvellous thing. So pansies have at the back of them, I'm going to show you on another one, let me just pick that, they've got this spur. Whoops. Can you see this thing here? It's called a spur. And these are just the sepals. But this spur is where all the magic happens. All the kind of pollination magic. So the stamens, which are what produces the pollen, they'll produce the pollen, but they also have appendages which can secrete nectar, and the nectar goes into the spur. And then when a pollinator comes, okay, we're plotting in this now. Where did it go? It goes up. It's much more, sort of moves around more, doesn't it? When a pollinator goes into the flower to pollinate it, and these pollinators are normally long-tongued bees who can actually access the spur area, the pressure of that tongue will cause a drop of nectar to be secreted from this appendage on the back of, hang on, let me concentrate on this line here. That's more or less right. Yeah, it'll cause a drop of nectar to be secreted by this appendage. So the drop of nectar coats the bee's tongue and makes it nice and sticky. But it also then, it leaves a coating on, but it also sucks back into the flower, where the female parts of the flower are, taking with it any nectar which has come from any pollen from the last flower that the bee has visited. And there's also a network in there of tiny little hairs, which nobody's, some research done has suggested that they are there to keep out smaller insects, because if you're a smaller insect, you're not going to have the weight to trigger this this mechanism which produces the nectar and so on. Therefore, you're not really going to be any good in terms of pollination. Therefore, giving that smaller insect nectar would be a waste of time. So why not save your resources for the ones who are actually going to be doing the pollination, and make certain there's a mechanism there so that the lighter weight insects can't get in? So that's what the fringe of hair may well be for. All of this information has come from a book that I love, which is called Understanding the Flowering Plants by Anne Bebbington, who is not only a very good botanical illustrator, but also an absolutely amazing botanist. So yeah, well worth investing in a copy of that. Talks about the structure of a lot of flowers and is very, very useful. If you're going to get into drawing and painting flowers, it's very useful to know a little bit about your subject, about the structure of it and why things look the way they are and are built the way they are. It really helps you when it comes to drawing and painting. So yeah, the cunning pansy. And pansies are they're called annuals, and they are mostly annuals, but they can occasionally live for a couple of years. I mean, if I put mine in the garden, I never dig them up. They just eventually give up the ghost. Sometimes they last 2, maybe 3 years. And even though they're hybrids, they can produce viable seeds, which is quite unusual. They're little survivors, I think. They're great little plants. And they also add, yeah, that does that. That follows these rays, doesn't it? To a certain extent. Okay. And down there. They can survive incredibly cold weather as well. Pansies can. So, I've seen photos of pansies in bloom with their little brave faces Their little brave faces sticking out of the snow, you know. And in fact, they bloom better when it's slightly warmer. Right, there we go. So this initial part is now done, and I think we should be able to mix up a little bit of colour. This is my paint box, and this is something actually somebody on YouTube told me to do, which is to make a little chart showing what all my colours are. I have about 30 colours that I use a lot, but you really don't need that many. What I want to demonstrate now is just how easy it is to get to a colour using different colour mixes. So the first way we're going to try and find this really pretty, I mean, if I hold this up really close, it's a beautiful colour, absolutely beautiful. It's kind of bluish purple, right? And that's what we're going to start with. So one way of mixing is, look, I'm using a scruffy old brush to mix my colours with, because I don't want to compromise the tip of my painting brush. This is Cobalt blue. So you can mix Cobalt blue with this bright pink down here. And this is, it's Opera Rose. I sometimes call it Opera Pink, but it's not, it's Opera Rose. Now, Opera Rose is a difficult colour because people sometimes say it's fugitive. Some people think it's fugitive. Some people don't think it's fugitive. Is it? Isn't it? People have done tests. Some people tell me I shouldn't use it because it is. Some people say don't worry. I love it. It's a colour which is very, very useful in nature. So that's your first mix, and you can see that's more or less right. To get it paler, as it always with watercolour, you dilute it, right? So you can see that's paler. It's very, at this point, it's very close to the flower. Another way of getting that same colour would be to start with a pre-mixed purple. So this one is Winsor Violet. Double check, Lizzie. Yeah, Winsor Violet. And again, we'll be mixing it with a blue. We'll use the Cobalt again. It's a stronger colour, so it's going to take a little bit longer to get that. There we go. Is that a little bit too blue? Maybe a tiny touch more. Anyway, so that's a very, very similar colour. And again, we'll make it lighter by diluting it. And then the third way, I thought we could start with a different colour. So we could start with this down here, which is permanent magenta, which is a really cool colour. And then why not change things up a gear and mix it with a different blue, not the Cobalt blue, but the ultramarine. So mixity, mixity. I mean, I'm mainly doing this just to show that you don't have to be prescriptive with your colour mixing. You can mix colours many, many different ways. And the thing to do is just to experiment until you get the one that you like. That's a little dry. I'm just going to double check. So take the specimen and literally hold it next to the colour mixes. Which looks best? Which is the most convincing mix? I would say that's a pretty darned close match. What do you think? I love it when colour mixing works. And I'm going to dilute the mix just with a bit of clean water. You can see it's really quite wet. And I'm going to build up that initial pale blue purple colour just with lots of tiny brush strokes. The first couple of marks are always really scary. Don't be intimidated. So follow the line of plant growth. And you've actually even got a guide here, because look, the rays coming out from the centre show you how the petal has laid itself down. So you want to do that. And I'm also looking to see if there's any areas which are lighter or darker. So what I'm actually doing is lots of tiny little lines and anchoring them at the outside edge. But where there's a bit more shade, because the petal, of course, is almost like fabric. So it folds and bends and catches the light. And where it's lighter, I press less hard and keep the strokes further apart. And where there's a darker tone, I paint the strokes slightly closer together. But they're also very important because they're a place where you can experiment. Nobody's going to see it unless you want them to. It's not It's not like it's going to be on show for anything. It can be as private as you want. You can have sketchbooks that you never show to anybody. So if you're starting out and you are feeling self-conscious about your journey into doing botanical illustration, keep a sketchbook. Just keep it to yourself, unless there's something you really want to share with people. And also they can work almost like journals. They can show your, you know, how you've grown as an illustrator or as an artist, how you've changed. Okay, so putting these lines out. I'm going to do this all round. There's no real benefit to you lot sticking with me the whole way. As I often think with these films, it's literally you guys watching me. So I'm looking very carefully at the petal as I draw. So there's that striation, so down that comes, and in fact it diverges here. Okay, and then here. That's a slightly different shape. There's another that comes round a bit like that. Do also feel free to rotate your page as you work. You might find that very useful. Okay, that comes down like that. There's another that comes here. Oh, and this is just a matter of looking. Look and look and look and see what you can figure out. See what the patterns are and try and replicate them to the best of your ability. Okay. Oops, that wasn't quite right, but hopefully it'll be hidden. It's much darker up in this corner of the petals. Okay, so now I've got that structure in. Then I can sort of build around that, doing what we were doing before. So it's just more of these little brush strokes very close together to give depth of colour, further apart in the areas that hit the light and that are less pigmented, I guess. Paler. Paler is a normal word of saying that, rather than less pigmented, for goodness sake, girl. Okay. And sometimes I'm going in and putting extra little marks. There you can see, just like I've done there. Oh, that's a mess up there. So I'll keep doing this. Gone around the edges here. Now I'm going to dilute our mix just with water to get it that much paler for the top petals. It's always important to keep your palette clean. I'm sometimes really bad at that, but for example, if you'd been painting a yellowish flower before and then you were mixing this, you'd have a horrible brownish greenish smear, so always be aware of that. Okay, and I'm turning the flower so I can see what I'm doing as well. There we are. And it's the same process, isn't it? You know, so but with this one I'm going to be even more careful with my lines, not even making them all the way in, and I'm not, can you see how I'm not quite, zoom in, not quite painting up to the edge, and that's so that there'll be a hopefully an elegant distinction between this top petal and the one below. Okay, so rotate your page. The one drawback of this is you see here these spirals. They can be annoying because as you're painting and rotating, you end up leaning on the spiral, which is, it just slightly inhibits the freedom of movement that you get from the paintbrush. But being able to lay it flat makes up for that, more or less. So again, lighter touch, more dilute paint. This should mean that these top two petals are paler. Now I hear you cry, where does the pansy come from? What is a viola? Well, we've discussed it being a hardy garden plant, but it is a hybrid and has been bred from the wild type. So the wild type goes by different names, but Heartsease is one of them. And there are lots of different wild pansies, much smaller flowers generally. Same family as the violets, which actually makes sense if you look at the structure of the flowers. Violets are smaller and they have more elongate petals, and they also are often highly scented in a way that pansies and violets aren't. But so the wild pansy, or the Heartsease, Viola what? I don't know if fences is there. But there's a mountain one, there's a sand one. And these were all collected in Victorian times. Everything to do with horticulture happened in Victorian times. By members of the landed gentry. Ditto. Everything always happened with horticulture, with members of the landed gentry. Mainly because they had the time to go and collect different looking pansies rather than be down the mines or scrubbing people's clothes to earn a living. Anyway, but so there were two people in sort of 1800s who were very keen on this. Lady Mary Elizabeth Bennet, and she introduced the garden pansy in 1813, and meanwhile Lord James Gambier was doing the same thing, and in 1839, just a little later, he found in his breeding experiments he'd come up with these blotches on the faces, which are very distinctive to do with pansies, and that was him, and so he introduced them there, and that was all marvellous. So then you have the domesticated pansy from there on in, and since then they've just been bred and bred and bred. But look, I'll show you. This is a wild type. Let me move that out of the way for a sec. Whoops. So this is the sand pansy, which I illustrated for a job, and you can see it's got. Oh, you remember I was talking about the elongate and then the lower leaves being rounder. It's got a little bit of that going on, and there's a lot of variation even within this one species, Viola tricolor Curtsii. Some are much more purple, some are much less purple. So I can see that Lady Elizabeth whatever had her work cut out for her when she was out collecting all the different varieties. Okay, I'm bringing these striations out to the edge. And actually what I'm going to do here, I'm still doing this, just the edging, but looking at it, because these petals, these top ones, are much paler, you can actually also see the venation of the petals much clearer. So we might even add that in once I've done this bit. Okay, so this is a bit of a gamble putting in these veins, but they are there and I want to show them. So, they are going to follow the line of we've done. So that's going to be like that. Oh, I've gone over the edge. That's stupid. That does that. And that does that. So I'm following the lines I put in, but I'm giving them a little depth to echo what I can see in my specimen. And that should also, the information that we get from this, in theory, should also make the eye understand that we also have these growth patterns going on through all of the petals, not just these top ones. It's kind of worked. It's a bit rubbish, but there we are. Whoops, those edges. Oh dear, that's not good. Oh, that's not good. Tissue paper, Nino. And on this side, it's different. And this also, this petal is hitting the light, so it's harder to see what's going on. Okay, so that definitely is a line, a striation coming out. So you can see, I always witter on and say, look at your specimen all the time. Well, this is an example of this. I mean, if I stop looking at this, there's no way I would be able to fake these lines using the same colour I've used before, not the dilute version. I'm now going to bring in the colour so it lands and makes it darker right on the edge of that white circle. Rotate that page. There we are. So, and the symbolism of pansies is also a big deal. So pansy, the word pansy comes from the word penser, which is thoughts. It's French for thoughts. And in the language of flowers, that kind of thing, it's the pansy is a symbol of love and remembrance, which I suppose makes sense if you're thinking about, you know, what you're going to spend a lot of time thinking about, either the dead or the past or the one you love. They're also linked to a saint, Saint Euphrasia, who maybe you've heard of, I hadn't. Here is another of these virtuous women who in times past refused to get married and instead took the veil. It doesn't seem like there was a third option. It's like if you didn't get married, you did have to become a nun, but you know, there we go. So she took the veil and she was a model of humility. And her symbol was the humble violet. So there we are. So it's to do with being humble and all that stuff as well. And then the last thing that it's a symbol of is something I hadn't heard about before, which is weird because I like the sound of it. So it's something called free thought. So it's a symbol of free thought, and free thought seems to be, again, I don't know when it was from or whether it's still a current thing, don't know. There's only so much information you can get off the internet. Free thought seems to be an idea that any belief system you happen to have should come not from dogma, and not just because somebody in power has told you that it is so, but it should be based on logic and reason. Yeah, I can get behind that. That sounds good. So maybe just by painting a violet, I've learned that I actually am an exponent of free thought. There you are. So all of that is now done, building into the darker areas around the face blotch. And now, by now my water, can you see, is a lovely pale purple colour. It looks almost like diluted methylated spirit. So what I need to do is literally using just the colour of the water. I don't like doing this, this makes me nervous. Putting a wash on. So this is literally just water on top. Now, part of my reason for my nervousness is this paper is Botanical Ultra Smooth, which is made by Bockingford, and although it's a okay paper, it is not one of my favourites, because when you put wet on top of it, sometimes it goes all fluffy and you lose all your crisp edges, which makes me want to despair. It's doing okay, but I am being very careful with that. Okay, just again making sure I echo the lines that I've already put down with this top wash, anchoring it against the outside edge, working my way round. Okay, now the top ones, as we know, are really super pale, so I'm using an even more dilute mix here. And I'm leaving a little, can you see I'm leaving a little line with my top wash. Except I'm not. I was going to show you that I was leaving a little line between those inner petals. Actually, what's happening there isn't that dreadful, so I shall keep an eye on it as it dries, make sure it doesn't do anything weird. But if I go in and try and fix it, that's going to create more problems, I think. And again, I'm still leaving a very thin white line up here. So that these two petals don't run into one another. And this time, on this side, I am going to try not to let them touch and bleed into one another. Okay. Right. Time for a cup of tea while that dries. This is dried, so the next step is to put a little bit of tonality in this white area, right? Because if we left that just totally white as it is now, it would look super odd. Again, I'm using very dilute colour. I'm using a tiny bit of the purple that we used for the palest, some of my paint water, and the smallest touch of cobalt blue. So look, that's a super pale colour. And looking very carefully at the flower. I don't like doing this. This is always nerve-wracking. Where are the bits that need... Okay. So, don't make it too dark. You can always make watercolours darker. You cannot make them lighter. And pulling these bits out. Bit of texture. I'm going to have to do something up here. This is a mess. You can always fix things once the paint's dry, you see. I'm actually going to take the opportunity to put in a bit of a shadow here. Again, at the end, we're going to put in shadows much more prominently, but for now, just a little bit of a suggestion is going to help me. And the last bit of white. Quite a lot of shadow there. Oops. And we're almost all the way around. Okay, so now before we work into these much darker blotches in the middle, we need to let that dry. So while that dries, I'm going to mix up the darker blotch in the middle. This is a Winsor Violet. That's a much stronger colour, and we are looking at something nice and dark, plus the Cobalt Blue. That's going to work better for us, isn't it? Yeah, that's pretty close, don't you think? Okay, so I'm now turning the brush. I've just realised I've mixed my colours with my painting brush. I'm turning the brush to get a point. And did you know that pansies, in fact most garden flowers, don't blame me though if you eat one and die. Did you know that pansies are edible? So those bits are nice and dark now. Now for the yellow. So that yellow is a very bright colour. I am looking at my paints and all I can think is lemon yellow. But I've got to rinse my brush thoroughly. So that's pure cadmium lemon, straight from the tin, straight from the pan. And I'm just going to pop that down here. It's only on this bottom petal. And the reason that you really need to be sure that you clean out your water and paintbrush and all that kind of stuff is because if you were to mix the purple with the yellow, then the yellow would become muddy, which we don't like, but it also would become very green, which would not be what we want. So even though it's quite a solid yellow, I'm still following those lines of growth and being quite careful. I'm also now going to add a tiny bit of cadmium yellow deep, which is this one, and I'm going to add that to my cadmium lemon because right at the centre of our yellow it's a tiny bit darker. but literally that's just going to be one very thin line. There we go. I say it's going to be one very thin line, but now I want to blend it in a little bit, which is just typical. Okay, that's good. Now we've got to wait for this to dry. Actually, as we're waiting for that yellow to dry, why don't we do the stalk? We've got the yellow, which is half of the battle. So I'm just going to add a tiny bit of cobalt blue to the yellow. And ta-da! As if by magic. That is more or less bang on for the stalk. So, leaving the heart of the flower to dry, I'm going to outline the stalk, looking where I'm going rather than at the tip of the brush, because that means you tend to get a much straighter line. My mum taught me that. And then this is a bit darker, so I'm filling that bit in. Slightly thicker line on this side. And then I just pop my brush in the water. Now I'm pulling down the paint on the far side. Traditionally in botanical illustration, your light source comes from the top left, which is why you normally see a thicker shadow on the left hand side of a stalk if it's been botanically illustrated than on the right hand side. Okay, and now because doing that has mucked me around here, I want to fill that in again. And also, while I've got green here, I'm going to get my hand lens out and have a little look at the flower. So very, very small amount, just here and here. Oh, crikey. And using a bit of water, slightly blend it in. It's also a bit weird, that area. I'm actually going to allow it to become quite green just there, because if I don't, it's going to be stark white, and it is not stark white there. Leave a bit of white just here, because then that'll draw the eye to the yellow. Okay. Working again this dark central blotch bit, and remember these rays are the same colour, so we don't need to worry too much about that. We do need to worry about the edge of the yellow. What does that actually look like? You know, how much of an indent is there? Things like that. Because at this point in time, we can swallow up the yellow with our painting, but we sure as anything can't add to it. If we were to try and put more yellow on, it would just look horrible and muddy, so we're not going to allow that to happen. Got to be careful. I mean, same old here, right? I'm just looking at the flower the whole time, being like, okay, well, you know, how far in do these blotches come into the yellow, and how, you know, how am I going to make absolutely sure I respect the edges of the yellow? Oh gosh. It's sunny here today. That's a first. Wales, sunshine, who'd have thought it? Almost feel like there's spring coming. That would be very welcome. Hasn't been a cold winter here at all, actually. There's barely even been any frost. It's been a couple of cold days, but okay. Now the striations, we're using exactly that same colour that we were just using before. I'm not going to lie, this bit always makes you feel sick because you've got to be really bold. So literally, again with your same thin brush, outline those striations, those stripes. So these are nectar guides, actually. The whole of the blotch, oh, it gets slightly sideways as well. The whole of the blotch on a pansy is designed to lure any potential pollinators. Only the larger ones, remember, who have nice long tongues, is intended to lure them into the centre of the flower where they'll find the nectar. And in fact, a lot of flowers you will see have the same. They have markings, striations, markings which lead in to the centre of the flower, which are very beautiful, but they're not really there for us, although we like them. They are there to guide the insects to the reward that they earn for pollinating the flower. The dark patch there. Whoops. Okay, and then literally just a little bit of water and add to these, fill them in, colour them in. And having done that, I'm going to zoom out a bit. I'm now going to darken up those central bits a little. Am I? Yes, I am, but only a little. These bits. Okay. Oh, that's messy there, isn't it? There we are. Just a bit of subtlety all the way around. Something's gone slightly wrong with this illustration. I'm not quite sure what it is. I think the striations are too bold, perhaps. Not sure. I'm not entirely satisfied with it. That's right. Doesn't look so weird. So find if you're doing something quite accurate, which this edge line is, it does help if you just hold your breath. Grass stems are particularly difficult for that when you're doing grasses, because you have to get those lines so straight. So you'll go through quite a long period of just not breathing at all, and then you'll suddenly be like I thought it was just me who did that, and then I was talking to one of my friends who does botanical illustration. She's like, nope, that's very familiar. She's like, we all do that. I was like, oh, thank goodness. Okay. This is just basically sharpening up the edge of the petals, because they were annoying me. They weren't sharp enough. They weren't crisp. And we like a crisp line. And the reason I'm doing these little striations is just to blend it in. Okay, so I'm going to continue doing that. So I've bulked up the edges of the petals quite carefully. And now I think I've realised what was going wrong with it, is that striations, these stripes go into the yellow. So if I do that, again, heart in mouth moment, maybe that'll make the whole thing look a bit less rubbish. Hopefully. It's a bit better. Marginally, and then slightly marginally better. Yellow. So this is a kind of brown just in here. And that'll draw the eye. So you need to be careful with that. Okay. And then a little more tonality on these, which I think the stamens peeping out at us. And then I'm going to do the rest of that stalk in. Just a dilute version of that green over the top. There we are. And I'm going to work a little more into this. Now, I'm going to put some drop shadows in here. So this is just pure cobalt with a little bit of water. Okay, so there's a shadow here. Blending in. There is also a shadow here. Again, I'm going to blend it in. And one here. Bit of a blend. Blend it in. Oh, I don't like this at all. Well, maybe it's good for you guys to see me fail. Blend it in. And there's a little bit of shadow just here. Okay, that's a bit better. Looks a little less stark. And then the last bits down here. Bring it into the heart, and on this side, and here. And because it is darker, I'm going to darken up in here. That's a bit darker there. I'm going to add a bit of blue here because I think it needs it. And a tiny bit of blue just here to try and centre the whole thing. I'm going to do one last thing. I've made a very dilute purple and I'm going to add it to the colours because I think the edge colours aren't quite dark enough. Again, you never stop painting until you stop. And this is not there yet. I thought it was, but it's not. So anchoring that wash out to the edges. Adding a little bit more colour all the way around. That's better already, isn't it? And then very pale right at the top. These ones as well, including over the areas I've been very careful about with my whites. It's the last hurrah. So they can be swallowed up now. And the other one. I think that's better. It's not perfect. Still not a painting I'm particularly pleased with. But it's better than it was 5 minutes ago. I think I know what's wrong. I think there's just not enough tonality on the flat of the petals. So now it's dry, I'm going to give that a go and see how much difference that makes, if any. Just adding a bit of tonal depth, exaggerating the very slight tonal differences I can see in the petals. See whether or not that brings it round. I think I've said this in my films before, and I'm still not guaranteed a success here, but what experience of things like botanical illustration brings you, it's not so much that you just get better because you practice, it's just you learn how to fix it when you make stupid mistakes. You learn how to look at your illustrations analytically and try and figure out what on earth has gone wrong, and then what tricks you might have up your sleeve for fixing that. Oh, this is much better. Well, why didn't I see it first time round? Crikey, Harper. Silly girl. Right, I'm going to work all the way around and I'll come back to you. Maybe not the only problem. But the main problem was that these petals were all too flat. And now they're less flat. Fancy that? So, yeah. This is once this is going on top of the dry paint. It's just the very darkest in these bits of tone that I've found. Bit of tonality. This last bit, this tweaking bit, can take ages actually. It can sometimes, you'll be delighted to hear, it can take days, but I don't think it's going to take days in this case because you guys haven't got that much time. And for those of you who say watching me paint is relaxing, which some of you are very sweet and do say that, I think today you'll realise it is not always so. This whole process is not always glitch free. Okay, I still, yeah, that's much better. That's much better. Hi, so we've now finished making the video of me painting a sketchbook illustration of a pansy or a viola, take a pick. As you can see towards the end especially, I was quite disheartened and dispirited. The end result is fine, but it just goes to show that even if you've been doing it for years, things can sometimes not work out the way you want them to. Don't throw it away, just have faith. If you want to see more of my work, please visit lizzieharper.co.uk. If you want to see more of these videos, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I know I meant to say that. So yeah, so here we are. We've finished drawing our little viola, our little violet. And there's the finished result. And yeah, it'll do. It'll do. Thank you very much for spending time with me, and please do feel free to leave comments below and I'll try and get back to you. And I'll see you next time. Thanks again. Bye.